My family mocked my computer thing for 10 years. At dinner I revealed I owned the vineyard they were toasting with and watched them freeze. Thanksgiving at my mother's house has always tasted the same, dry, overdone and tough to digest. Even before the turkey was served, the house smelled like cinnamon candles and white wine breath, like it always does. And the fireplace crackled like a soundtrack for someone else's life. A phony comfortable postcard you'd never send but always get. I lingered in the entrance for a second, too long, coat still on and boots damp from the walk up her recently power-washed driveway, listening to the laughing from the kitchen. My sister's laugh in particular was loud, purposeful, and exuded that prepared ease that made you forget how keen she was behind all the charm. Mom noticed me first. Her smile was full of teeth and intention, the same one she used at HOA meetings and when the bank teller recognized her. "There she is," she replied, wiping her hands on her apron as if I had brought something contagious inside. "You're late." I was not. Not really. I walked in at 4:15 as I did every year. But it didn't matter. With Mom I was constantly off by something. 5 minutes, 3 pounds and 1 diploma. "Traffic," I answered, removing my coat. "You know how the 405 is." She did not. She never left her gated neighborhood unless it was for a charity brunch. Jessica was giving a TED lecture or whatever the hell she was up to. "Oh, Jess is already here," Mom responded, flinging the name at me like a velvet glove with a rock inside. "She got in early, said she wanted to help set it up." Of course she did. Jessica had a way of showing up early in the story and still having the final say. I could already hear her voice coming in from the dining room, discussing a trip to Bees with Mark, her second husband, who never seemed to blink. He was the type of man who would wear a jacket to a cookout and call it upgraded casual. I walked into the kitchen and there they were. The cast of characters who had never changed, only strengthened their roles over the years, like a family sitcom that forgot to end after season 3. Jessica, dressed in cream cashmere and pearls with makeup so beautiful that I didn't even try, grinned as if she had won something. Mark was already on his second glass of Pinot Noir, chuckling along to a joke without a punchline. Dad leaned against the far wall near the pantry, arms folded, his gaze fixated somewhere to the left of the talk. He did this frequently. He stayed on the sidelines, always listening but never interfering. Mom led me to the counter like a stray cat she didn't know was housed. "You can help with the rolls," she offered, offering me a dish towel. "Not the turkey, not the stuffing, but the buns. Something store-bought, inconsequential, something you could burn without anyone noticing." I smiled, nodded and folded the towel over my forearm as if I were a waiter in a retirement home dinner theater. For the next 40 minutes I wandered like a ghost through a house I knew all too well. I helped distribute the dishes, refilled the cranberry sauce and complimented the linens I had seen at Home Goods 2 weeks before. Nobody inquired about my employment. No one asked how I was doing. They wondered if I was still doing that thing with computers as Mom defined my business. She didn't recognize the name. She had never asked. No one came to visit the house I bought last year. When I received my first 7-figure contract, I celebrated with my cat and an expensive bottle of champagne from a bodega on Vine. But Jessica received accolades for switching to oat milk. Mom eventually pulled out the nice china. That indicated we had officially moved from the informal phase to the performance portion of the evening. This is when the questioning began, the soft jabs, the subtle pecking order. "Mark just made partner," Mom exclaimed as if he had cured cancer. Jessica flushed and waved it off, claiming it was merely a formality, her way of bragging twice in one sentence. "And of course Jessica's app will be available in the first quarter," Mom said, slipping another scoop of mashed potatoes onto my plate without asking. I looked across the table and realized something important. Everyone here assumed they knew who I was, the quiet one, the late bloomer, the one who never quite got it together. But what didn't they know? I had created something bigger than all of their titles together. I just never welcomed folks to the show who couldn't handle not having the spotlight on them. Jessica smirked as she glanced over. "So what's new with you anyway?" she inquired, much like you might ask if someone is still single. I spotted Dad staring at me from the corner, his expression unreadable. Mom leaned in a bit too eagerly for comfort, lips pursed as if she was resisting the want to give me counsel I had never asked for. Mark sipped his wine and tried to care. I took a deep breath and smiled, placing my napkin just so. "Nothing big," I answered, watching the candlelight flicker in Jessica's earrings. "Just met a few goals I set for myself." "Quiet ones," I said, looking right at Mom. "I don't usually invite people who don't want to see it." Silence. Pure, dense tension, slick silence. Even the cranberry sauce appeared to freeze in mid-slide. Mom blinked. Jessica's lips parted as if she were going to say something, but she didn't. Mark peered into his wine glass, hoping for a solution to emerge. And me? I just smiled because I knew what would happen next. I had planned for it. I had rehearsed. I had stacked the deck and laid the bait, and the show was finally about to begin. Let them squirm, let them ponder. There's a moment immediately before someone says something harsh that feels like the breath is sucked out of the room, as if all of the oxygen has decided it's not worth staying to see what's going to happen. That is what it felt like. Not simply stillness, but silence with its fingers wrapped around your throat. We'd finished the turkey potatoes, the second bottle of Pinot, and Mark's yarn about a business trip to Seattle which had no point but took 7 minutes to tell. I hoped we'd get through it all without the customary blow to the ribs disguised as parental care, but I should have known better. I usually do. Mom reached for the butter dish without looking at me and remarked, "So why do you think you've never been as ambitious as your sister?" Just like that. Casual, as if she were asking if I wanted extra gravy. There is no warning, no setup, just the scalpel straight to the bone. Jessica did not even flinch. Mark smirked as if he had just witnessed someone slide on a piece of ice. Dad appeared to want to shrink into the chair cushions, but that was his usual expression. I did not respond right away. I let the question linger there, unpleasant and unwanted, hanging above the roasted Brussels sprouts and stuffing like the ghost of every slight that had ever occurred at this table. I looked at Mom first. Her face was very calm and her eyes were soft, as if she truly believed she was helping. Then I looked at Jessica, who was now carefully wiping the corner of her mouth with her handkerchief, exuding amused detachment. I could almost hear her thoughts. She was going to cry, lash out, or both. But I did not. Instead, I slowly placed my fork down, folded my hands in my lap and smiled. Not a snarky smile. Not a wounded one. The smile you give when you know something that no one else does. I met my goals, I answered, still beaming. I just never invite people who don't want to see it. I swear to God that even the green beans stopped moving. Jessica's fork remained in midair. Mark blinked as if someone had taken a photograph. Dad cleared his throat and became really engaged in his sweet potatoes. And I watched Mom's jaw clench for a fraction of a second, a slight shift similar to a glitch in the Matrix. But then it passed. "Well," she said, buttering a roll with absolute precision. "That's nice. That is nice." The linguistic equivalent of slamming a door in someone's face and smirking. But that was sufficient. I had drawn first blood and the ripple effect was still visible around the table. Jessica inclined her head slightly, as she always did when she wanted to make something intimate seem professional. "What kind of goals?" she inquired casually, as if she were inquiring what type of kale I preferred in my smoothies. "I mean, I didn't know you were working on anything." I shrugged, sipped my wine and added. "Nothing flashy. Just got my team settled into the new space upstate." I watched as the words landed. Jessica blinked first. Mark looked at her, perhaps wondering whether he had missed something. Mom gave a small twitch of her brow, the same tick she got whenever someone expressed anything she didn't agree with. "You moved?" Mom inquired, appearing nonchalant as if she were reading from a teleprompter. "I thought you were still in that little apartment downtown." "That was years ago," I added, extending the delay just long enough to make it feel intentional. "I bought a place last year, needed more room. The company's grown a lot since then." Jessica lifted her eyebrow. "Company?" Her voice was flat. But I could hear it, a mix of astonishment, curiosity, and yes, a hint of terror. The kind of worry that comes from recognizing the story may be shifting beyond your control. "Yeah," I replied casually, sliding my wine glass forward for a refill I didn't require. "Been running my own business for 6 years now. Started it back in 2023. So yeah, it's been over 10 years. Nobody mentioned anything. Not one word. The math did not add up and I knew it. But it was not the goal. I wanted them to notice. I wanted them to think about it, to focus on it rather than on the fact that they had all missed everything else. It was bait and I dangled it." Mark eventually spoke. "What kind of business?" His voice was stiff and his eyes darted back to Jessica as if he wasn't supposed to ask. I offered him the same smile I'd given to clients who underestimated me. Wide, pleasant, and somewhat too serene. "Software tools, small business platforms, couple government contracts, boring stuff." "Oh," he responded as if I had just informed him I collected stamps. Jessica reached for the gravy boat, believing it may save her. "That's great. I had no idea you were doing all that." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "You should have said something. I figured if you were interested you'd ask. I told you. Simple. Director. The reality is. Too keen to touch." For a minute no one moved. Mom then picked up her wine glass and said, "Well, I'm just glad everyone's doing so well." That was her method of retiring. She didn't want to dig any deeper because she'd already fallen in and hadn't realized it yet. But I saw it. I saw it all. The fracture in Jessica's confidence. The way Mark shifted in his seat and Dad's expression when he looked at me as if he was finally seeing something new. My phone vibrated in my pocket. One brief tremor. I took it out without seeming like it mattered. With one glimpse I knew it was the email I had been waiting for. Confirmation of something that if I desired could flip the table metaphorically and possibly physically. I returned the phone to my coat pocket, tucked the information away like a sharpened dagger and took another mouthful of turkey. The show was just getting started. 3 weeks before Thanksgiving, while Jessica was posting stage selfies from her rooftop yoga class and Mom was most likely hand-picking the place cards that would eventually line this battlefield of a dining table, I was planning something far more intricate than a side dish menu or a floral centerpiece. I was not going to dinner this year to participate. I was about to reveal. This was not about conflict. I was not going to yell, cry, or wave around a litany of complaints like a martyr. No, it was going to be something softer, colder, more surgical. Because if there's one thing I've learned about vengeance, it hurts more when it's quiet. It began with the wine, a small action but one that meant more than anyone at the table could ever comprehend. 2 weeks before the event I delivered a case of my best reserve, a bold deep Syrah created in partnership with a vineyard partner up north, to Mom's home. But not under my name, of course. This would have ruined everything. Instead it came from a fictitious boutique company I'd created specifically for this occasion, complete with a beautiful label and a made-up French-sounding name that she'd believe was pricey. I knew she'd be thrilled to serve anything that appeared exclusive, and exclusive something her guests would appreciate. The bottle was already on the table when I arrived that day, and it was half empty by the time we got to the main course. I watched them drink, compliment, and swirl it around in their arrogant crystal goblets, unaware that they were toasting their own ignorance. But wine was just the beginning. The actual move was the person I invited. Mom had technically issued an invitation to everyone. But I nudged her. I suggested she invite a couple of family friends who we'd known for years but hadn't seen in a while. I made certain that one of those persons was Erin Shaw, a name Jessica hadn't heard in a long time despite her efforts to ensure that no one ever heard it again. Erin previously worked with Jessica when her startup was still active and seeking investors. They had been close until the scandal. Jessica gently buried it before it could reach Mom's wine-soaked ears. The thing about Erin is that she does not forget. And she does not forgive. Erin arrived with her usual charm, a sweet smile and a bottle of Prosecco, and Mom greeted her like a distant cousin from a family branch she didn't recognize but was too proud to admit. Jessica flinched when she noticed her. Just a flicker. But I caught it. Mark did not. Mark was too busy laughing at his own jokes and trying not to stare at Erin's legs. He isn't subtle. Not even on holidays. While Jessica was in the kitchen pretending to help with the gravy, Mark moved in too close to Erin and murmured something about networking that made her raise an eyebrow. I filed it aside. Just another thread. Jessica lied at supper. Bold-faced. Smooth as glass. She informed everyone that her new position was Chief Strategy Officer for a wellness tech startup in Palo Alto. She also mentioned the company, which I knew from a Google alert I had placed months earlier. Yes, the company had been acquired, but it was not by choice. It succumbed to legal scrutiny. I knew this because I had paid for the damn court records. Jessica did not hold any leadership positions. She was consulting for the same public relations firm that had helped her sanitize the story in the first place. It might have been funny if it wasn't so offensive. And still no one inquired. Mom beams with pride. Mark nodded as if he had memorized the script. Dad sipped his wine and remained silent as usual. I could have spoken up then. But it wasn't time yet. No, I wanted someone else to peel back the first layer from the outside where Jessica had no control over the story. So I waited. And I watched. Mom felt it was time for a toast near the end of the meal when everyone was full, warm, and sipped freely. She always gives a sappy speech about family thanks and how grateful we are. It is usually innocuous. But this year, as she raised her glass of my wine, she looked at Jessica and remarked, "And to my beautiful, brilliant daughter who's always making us proud, may your new company bring you the success you deserve." Jessica grinned like a politician at a donor dinner with teeth and polish. She lifted her glass. And then Erin spoke. "Oh, I didn't know you were back in tech," she remarked softly, her voice as light as chiffon. "Last I heard there was still a pending investigation with the SEC, but that must be cleared up by now, right?" Silence. Actual silence. Not the sort where people take a moment to reflect, but the kind where everything comes to a halt because no one knows what the hell happened. Jessica's hand froze while toasting. Mark blinked, puzzled. Mom tilted her head in that puzzled, brittle manner, attempting to decipher what she'd just heard. Erin simply smiled and sipped her wine before turning to me and saying, "This is great, by the way. You have excellent taste." I caught her sight, held it and gave a slight knowing nod because she knew someone else has now followed suit. There it was. The first layer peeled. Jessica spent years polishing the first real crack in her mirror. And the best part? I hadn't said a single thing. The thing with stress is that you can't always see it coming, but you can feel it. Pulling at the corners of every syllable, stretching smiles just a little too broad and making laughing sound hollow like a cough disguised as amusement. That dining room bathed in gentle chandelier light and the flickering shadows of half-burned taper candles had evolved from a performance space to something raw, brittle enough to fracture with the weight of a syllable. Jessica's stance had gradually shifted from confident lean to careful containment, as if she could hold herself together with sheer willpower if she only clamped her teeth hard enough and refused to blink too quickly. Following Aaron's incorrect comment about the SEC, a heavy bitter silence descended over the table like a fog that no one wanted to accept. Jessica did not respond immediately. She did what she always does when cornered. She stalled with a polished non-response. "Oh, you must be thinking of someone else," she remarked with a short giggle that hardly softened the sharpness in her voice. "There's so much gossip in this industry." She looked at Mark, evidently expecting he would join in. He tried. God bless him, he tried. But his timing was terrible. He reached for his glass of wine, knocked it over in his haste, and sent a dark crimson arc of surah shooting across Mom's cream linen tablecloth. It soaked in, quickly blooming like a bruise, and nobody moved for a moment. "Jesus, Mark." Jessica snapped louder than she intended, and that was the moment. That's when everyone stopped pretending. "It's fine," Mom answered hastily, reaching for napkins, her voice tight with forced patience, as it always was when the image shattered and she had to hustle to patch it before anyone noticed too much. But the wine stain was still there, silently oozing into the cloth. Even though she was trying to mop everything up, no one was looking at the table anymore. Aaron grinned, not cruelly or gloatingly, but in the way a person grins when they realize they've opened a door and are now interested who will walk through it. "Funny," she remarked, leaning her chin against her hand, "because I just spoke with a buddy who stated they were still attempting to get their money back from your last endeavor. What was its name again? Vital Glow?" Jessica froze. There was only one beat, but it was long enough. Her gaze flickered to Mom and then back to Aaron. "I wasn't in charge of finances," she admitted. Her voice had become too flat to pass for calm. "I was advisory only." The conversation now had teeth. Mark reclined back in his chair, one hand still grasping the stem of his fallen wine glass, as if gripping something delicate might cause the ground underneath him to stop shaking. My mother, meanwhile, had stopped dabbing at the stain and stood there clutching a handful of wet paper towels as if they were evidence in a case she didn't want to solve. I took a long, slow sip of my wine, then looked at Mom in the quietest voice I could muster. "Do you remember when you told me you invested in Jessica's company last year? How proud were you?" The room inhaled. "You mentioned it was a portion of your retirement savings, correct?" Silence is not always quiet. Sometimes it feels like the floor suddenly collapsed beneath everyone and no one knows where to land. Mom's gaze shifted from me to Jessica. And I saw it. The flash of terror. The realization. She had no idea the company was going out of business. She had not been informed that the website had quietly gone offline. Alternatively, emails sent to their support team were no longer receiving responses. Or that Jessica had moved on, remaking herself as a thought leader in a different field under a new fictitious title. Jessica's voice trembled as she finally said it wasn't like that. But she did not refute it. "You told her it was stable," I murmured. My voice remained quiet. But something had changed. Not angry. Simply surgical. "You told her you had it under control." "I didn't know it would tank," Jessica exclaimed. And now she was unraveling, grasping the ends of the rope she'd spent years twisting into a noose she'd never wear. "Things change, okay?" The market shifted. "Do you mean when the investor sued for misrepresentation?" Aaron offered. "Not even." Attempting to conceal the glint in her eyes. Mark rose up, said something about air, and walked away. Into the kitchen, or perhaps the garage, or somewhere that didn't include this table and the rising mound of secrets collapsing under their own weight. Mom sat down gently, as if the chair was the only thing keeping her upright. Her face was pallid and she had no answer. There was no platitude, no scolding, only stillness. I looked at Dad, who hadn't spoken in 20 minutes, and he was already looking at me. There was something odd about his eyes this time. Not a disappointment, not surprising, but perhaps something closer to recognition, as if he'd finally heard the part of the story I'd been telling through my silence all these years. He did not grin, nod, or say anything, but I didn't really need him to. Jessica stood up. Her chair scraped violently against the floor, the sound cutting through the dense air. "I'm done," she announced, her voice cracking. "I'm not doing this with you." She looked at Mom, expecting backup, but none came. Then she turned and marched out, her heels clicking on the tile like gunshots. Mom stood frozen, staring after her. And I just picked up my fork and ate another bite of sweet potato casserole. I was not finished. Not yet. After Jessica stormed out like a politician fleeing a scandal, her heels resounding down the hallway and the door swinging with more drama than a soap show cliffhanger, the dining room finally fell silent without feeling artificial. It was the kind of silence that follows a demolition when all the parts are still suspended in the air and no one is ready to look at, let alone discuss the damage. Mark had vanished, probably retreating into the garage to order an Uber or simply to pace and reconsider every life decision he had made since 2018. Erin was sipping her third glass of wine, completely relaxed, as if she just spent the last hour pruning a bonsai rather than detonating a landmine in the middle of a family meal. I rose up slowly, not out of haste or to be dramatic, but because I wanted a moment to breathe in a space free of tension and unspoken judgments. "I'll clear the table," I said, more for habit than anything else. Nobody argued. Nobody even nodded. Mom sat motionless, fists clasped in her lap, her gaze fixed not on me or the wine spill but on the vacant chair where Jessica had been seated minutes before. Perhaps she was still waiting for her to return to sweep in and smooth things over with a half-truth and a well-crafted apologies. But not this time. The story arc has concluded. And the next chapter had already begun. I stacked dishes, scraped leftovers into the compost, rinsed the cutlery in cold water and watched the gravy swirl down the drain like everything else that used to matter in this house. I moved slowly, not because I was exhausted but because it felt tremendously wonderful to be in charge of the storm cleanup. For once I wasn't the one explaining, apologizing or reducing myself to keep the peace. I was the peacemaker. I was the storm and the eye of it. When I brought out dessert, it wasn't store-bought or wrapped in plastic like Mom's normal stash of sweets. This was my pecan pie, a recipe I had refined over the years. The one I created every fall but never took to Thanksgiving since it never fit the theme. I set it in the center of the table on the same linen runner that was forever inked with red wine regret and sat down without saying anything. Dad went for a slice first without hesitation. He cut it clean, took a mouthful and closed his eyes as if he were trying to recall something vital. When he opened them again, he stared at me in a way he had never done before. Not just that he spotted me, but that he recognized me in the same way you realize a fact you've been circling for years but have never confronted. "I always knew you were the sharp one," he remarked quietly. "Not intended for Mom, Erin, or anybody else. This is just for me." It was ridiculous how much that affected me, like a punch wrapped in velvet. I didn't cry or choke up, but something inside shifted, something ancient, tired and worn from too many years of neglect. I nodded once more in acknowledgement, then gratitude, because it wasn't about the words. It was about finally being noticed. Then without fanfare I walked to the buffet and added the finishing touch. Another bottle of wine identical to the one on the table earlier. Same label. Same gorgeous gold foil packaging. But this time I placed it just in front of Mom and waited. She squinted, perplexed at first, then moved forward to read the fine print beneath the brand name, and then I saw at the instant she comprehended. "This is my name. The founder and principal vintner's name is printed in serif font beneath the label, a product from my company." Everyone complimented the wine, but no one knew who made it. They had commended the bottle as world-class, the one they'd sipped while celebrating a lie. That was mine all along. She stared at me, then back to the bottle and finally at Erin, who arched an eyebrow but said nothing. "Did you make this, Mom?" asked, her voice cracking with disbelief. I nodded. "I own the Vineyard. We launched it last year with a portion of our software sales. It's little but doing nicely. We sold out our first run in less than 2 weeks." Her expression was not angry or pride or even humiliation. It felt disorienting, as if she had just realized she had been reading from the wrong script in the wrong play for years. "Why did you never say anything?" I picked up the knife, pushed it through the pie's flaky crust and placed a slice on her plate. Then with a calmness that could have been cold I said, "Because ambition does not require applause, it only needs a plan." And with that I poured myself one last glass of my own wine, leaned back in my chair and let the stillness do the rest. The room did not explode. Nobody yelled. Jessica did not come back. Mark did not suddenly arrive with an apology or an alibi. Erin went gently after dessert with a genuine hug and a heartfelt thank you. Mom did not speak for the remainder of the evening. She sat there staring at the pie, the wine and all she had missed. Dad patted my shoulder on the way out and muttered, "You didn't simply show them. You taught them." I didn't need to understand the lesson. I didn't require validation. I needed some distance. As I stood outside under the cold November sky, wrapping my coat tight and inhaling the harsh air like it was the first fresh breath I'd had in years, I heard the door lock behind me. I did not glance back. That residence no longer had any purpose for me. It's not their pride. This is not their consent. It is not their permission to be more than the quiet one in the corner. Certain bridges need to be burned because certain houses are never worth returning to. Some women construct empires in silence, allow them to wonder where the smoke came from.